Last week, I asked you guys to share with me your witchy and pagan unpopular opinions and hot takes. And boy, did you all deliver. I got over 100 comments, some really interesting thoughts and opinions that you all shared with me. So we're going to be digging into them today. I'll be sharing with you my own 2 cents on some of these topics. So grab yourself a cup of tea because this could get a bit controversial, and let's jump right into the first comment. So might as well start with the most controversial one first to get it out of the way. Let's see, we have the community is simultaneously too woke yet also too far right. This comment is pretty interesting and it got a lot of responses from you all. And I think there is something to this comment. And while of course when it comes to social issues and politics, paganism and witchcraft isn't immune from those things. And it is good to share and to teach others about some of these political issues. But I would say that when it comes to the movement being quote too woke, one of the things I have noticed is on social media, Instagram, Facebook, especially Facebook, TikTok, and even here on YouTube, I do see quite a lot of posts and content focusing purely on these quote woke issues, and I almost see more of that than content that's actually digging into what paganism is about, how do you do paganism, how do you celebrate, or when it comes to witchcraft, where are these spells and rituals coming from, what is their history, and how do you perform them? So I do kind of think there is a point there that sometimes the community tends to focus too much on the political aspects of witchcraft and paganism and not enough on the practicality of how to go about doing it and the history. So I do see a point there. And then on the other side, the fact that the community is simultaneously too far right, I definitely see that as well in certain circumstances. It is pretty sad to see that the far right has co-opted certain pagan symbols, especially in the Norse pagan community. And they're using these kind of religious symbols in their own political context, which isn't really appropriate and not a good look at all. So yes, I worry about that as well. So I guess I can kind of see where this comment is coming from. Let's get to the next one. It's okay to not believe in everything that is popularized in mainstream witchy culture. For example, if you don't believe in the Fae, crystal healing, astrology, etc., that's perfectly fine and doesn't make you any less of a witch. It's most important to work with what calls to you and not force yourself to believe in something just because everyone else does. In witchcraft and paganism, there is not just one correct belief or way of practicing because everyone's path is different. I definitely agree with this comment. There is a lot of aspects of paganism and witchcraft that I don't necessarily believe in. That doesn't mean I think it doesn't have value. Astrology is a good example of this, where I find astrology really interesting. I love the symbolism. I like learning about the history of astrology and how it all connects to these other occult practices. But do I believe in something like horoscopes, for example? Not really. Same thing when it comes to crystals and energy healing. I do think crystals in particular can be very powerful items. I do think they are wonderful representations of the element of earth. I think that they can perhaps focus our energy, but when it comes to certain crystals healing certain things or certain ailments, I'm not really on board with that belief. But like the comment says, to each their own. There are no rules when it comes to paganism and witchcraft, so you personally can pick what and what you don't want to believe in when it comes to this practice. Okay, next one. Social media makes you believe that you need all these fancy tools and materials to make effective spells, rituals, and cleansings, when in fact, what matters is what you feel inside yourself. You can cleanse a space through visualization, chanting, singing, or clapping with your hands. The only thing really needed is your own body, but I guess that's just not aesthetically pleasing enough. I really feel this comment too sometimes. I think there is so much pressure to have all the stuff when it comes to paganism and witchcraft that we forget sometimes that we have all that we need within ourselves. You don't need to go out and buy a fancy crystal wand or a really elaborate altar statue or cauldron or anything like that. Of course, you can if you want, and these items can enhance our practice, but they are by no means necessary. We already have everything we need within ourselves and within the natural world too. So totally agree with this comment. This is something I've of course brought up many times on my channel before. It's okay to disagree with magical associations you find in books or online. It's your craft, your rules. And also, you can use absolutely anything in your witchcraft as long as you have clear intentions. Yeah, I kind of agree with this. I do think when it comes to magical associations, so this color means this, or this crystal would be good for this spell, or this plant would be good to use for this ritual, things like that. Sometimes they have value, and sometimes I get the feeling that they were just made up. So you can choose to use them if you'd like, or you can choose to create your own magical association with the object. I do think there is some associations that make more sense than others, especially when it comes to herbalism, so using certain plants for certain spells and rituals, because often there is a correlation between what that plant was historically used for, either in a spiritual or a medical context, and some of that information has actually been passed down through the ages. So I do give probably more value to an association that does have historical precedent towards something like this crystal is good for, cleansing your heart chakra or something like that. But again, to each your own. You can choose to work with certain established magical associations, or you can kind of determine your own based on your own intuitive senses. So definitely up to you there. Okay, next one. A lot of our practices, traditions, etc. are being co-opted by the mainstream and marketed to people like a fashion. I think a lot of people are doing witchy things without any real soul-deep connection to the practice. It's kind of becoming more acceptable to do certain witchy things that the mainstream has picked up on, whereas those of us who actually identify as pagan witches and honor this way of life still face discrimination by general society. So it's kind of weird that some people can, quote, play witch and have that be acceptable, versus many of us who do not feel comfortable talking about our beliefs and practices the way members of other religions do. I really see where this person is coming from here. I have noticed that over the past decade or so, it has become somewhat fashionable to be a witch, or to at least appear like a witch. And when I was starting out my YouTube channel, I felt kind of pressure that I needed to look the part in order to be successful. So I needed to kind of look mysterious and edgy, or wear a lot of black. And if you know me, I'm just not that person. I'm pretty girly. I am not goth at all. So trying to force myself into this witchy aesthetic was just something that was not going to happen. And I do think that people who do fit into that aesthetic might actually find more success online than someone who doesn't, which can, I think, build some resentment from the wider community, that the people who are actually doing the work, who are doing the research, who have been pagan for multiple decades. They're often not recognized as experts in the wider community, but someone who might just have a large following because they're super on trend when it comes to their witchcraft practice is suddenly viewed as an expert in the field. So I do think there is an issue there, and that's true to not just the witch and pagan community, but so many niches within the online space. So hopefully that does change over time. I think witchcraft will stop being a fad and a trend soon, and once that happens, a lot of the people that were only in it for superficial reasons will kind of fade away. So we just have to wait for that to happen. Okay, next one. The pagan sphere is a lonely path due to the lack of local community that occurs, that often our only choices are to try and meld with more new age classes and gatherings. I'll bet many of these focus on business versus community, and that takes away from the essence of us gathering in the first place. That's a really good point. So I would say that the kind of wider new age community as a whole is probably much larger than specifically pagan or witch communities. So in order to have kind of any large event, often we are kind of combining different things. So new age stuff, pagan stuff, witchy stuff kind of all gets thrown in together for these events like Pagan Pride. And because of that, it can get watered down, where there's not really much depth there to the rituals and the classes or the programs, or even, like she mentions, there's kind of a business aspect versus a community aspect. So most of these pagan and witchy events are something that you either have to, pay, a ticket to go to, or it's mostly focused on vendors selling things. So there's this kind of heavily business focused component to it versus a community gathering, kind of like a other religious institution might have, like a church or a temple or a synagogue, where it's definitely not necessarily a business focused space. It's more of a community gathering and spiritual space. And because we don't have things like that in the pagan space, what we do have, classes, workshops, conventions often have this kind of more business focused selling thing aspect to them, which is kind of unfortunate sometimes. Of course, it can be fun. I, like everyone else, like to buy things. And of course, I too have hosted my own paid workshops and have attended many paid workshops, and those are great. But I do wish sometimes that there was also an alternative that was more spiritual focused and community focused. Okay, next comment. I think the notion of, quote, closed practice is something that comes from a good place, but is now thrown around as a gatekeeping weapon against well-meaning practitioners. Deterring people from stealing cultural artwork to put on Etsy products, that's good. Demanding that someone abandon their fundamental beliefs about the universe and a practice revolving around those beliefs that works for them, that's bad. To be honest, it feels like one of those things a lot of people advocate for publicly because they know it's perceived as the correct thing to do and they don't want to get canceled. So this whole concept of closed practice and open practice is something I see constantly being debated and argued about. In every single video, I'll have someone in the comments mentioning that such and such is a closed practice or such and such is an open practice, and then there'll be argument back and forth on a video that's not even related to those things. So clearly, this is very much on people's minds. And I do think this is something that pagans in previous generations weren't so focused around, in part because the vast majority of paganism back in the day was focused on kind of European pagan traditions, specifically British pagan traditions. Almost every piece of literature you could find was just about Druidry and Celtic paganism, and it's only in the past, decade or so that paganism has really opened up and started to become less Eurocentric to a wider audience, which is great. It is so wonderful that now we are able to learn about so many different pagan cultures and religions all around the world. And I think it's wonderful to go out and learn about these other pagan faiths. I don't want to discourage anyone from that. I myself have talked about Shinto pretty often on my channel as a spiritual system that I am eternally fascinated by. So I think it's totally okay to go out and learn as much as you can. Where the tricky situation is when it comes to people proclaiming that they are a member of that faith and system, if that system in general is what's called a initiatory tradition. Usually people are using the term closed practice when perhaps a better term used might be an initiatory tradition, where you have to kind of go through a specific process to become a member of that faith. We have many initiatory traditions. Of course, when you think of many closed practices like voodoo, for example, where you kind of have to go through this very specific process to become a voodoo priestess. It's not something just anyone can join. However, instead of kind of looking at it in that way, people just get so, I think, bogged down about race when it comes to this stuff, where it's like, oh, you can't do this pagan path because you're this race, or yes, you can if you're this race. And I think people probably make it into a much bigger issue than it actually is in real life. I don't think there are thousands and thousands of pagans trying to shove their way into a certain Native American tribal shamanistic path, and thousands of people trying to become voodoo high priestesses. Yes, a couple people might be trying to do that, but I think this whole issue of closed and open practices is a bit overblown. I don't really see this as much of an issue as people are trying to make it out to be. Now, they did bring up a good point of profit motive here, and I do think there is a huge problem with someone trying to financially profit off of a different pagan path that might be considered an initiatory tradition or a closed practice. That is a huge issue, and I think over the years people have stopped doing that as much, so I think that's starting to decrease, which is great. So this is, of course, a very difficult topic to discuss, and I'm probably tripping over my words a bit here. But in general, I wish we could stop fighting over this so much and approach it a little bit more like, how awesome is it that we get all of these amazing perspectives and can learn from all these pagans on all these different paths and discover great insights about the wider world by looking through these different lenses and understanding these wonderfully rich cultures. So that's my 2 cents. Don't hate on me too much in the comments, but I'm sure some of you will. Okay, let's see. Next one. What was a time-honored true craft, which often took a lifetime of care and study, is being co-opted and turned into an anything-goes fad, giving it a cheap and superficial air. Yeah, I definitely see where this is coming from. Part of it is the lack of, quote, mystery. I think it used to be that when it came to witchcraft and there were only a few books that you could study from, or there was only a few experts around, you took it very seriously. You really did almost approach it as a academic mission where you were on this quest to learn and discover, and you would be writing in your book of shadows late at night by candlelight. It was kind of this almost monastic pursuit of knowledge. But because that knowledge has been disseminated and is so widely acceptable, it in a way devalues it a little bit. It is, of course, wonderful that it's so much easier to learn all of this stuff, but at the same time, it leads to a lot of misinformation out there. It kind of cheapens the practice as a whole. It removes that kind of air of mystery to paganism and witchcraft that it definitely used to have. And yeah, it kind of makes it into this fad, which we talked about early on, and the whole kind of witchy trend and fad aspect to it. So yeah, I definitely see where this comment is coming from. Okay, 2 more to go. Next one. I dislike the term baby witch and how popular it's become. You either identify as a witch or you don't. You don't need to practice for a certain amount of years to achieve a set level of experience before you can call yourself a, quote, real witch. Yeah, you know, a lot of people don't like this term. Personally, it doesn't bother me that much. I think it's kind of just a little silly, but it's totally fine if people want to call themselves a baby witch, or maybe a little bit better might be to call yourself a novice witch or a beginner witch. The baby witch term is a little infantilizing, but as this comment said, there isn't a certain point where you can suddenly call yourself a witch, or that you are allowed to call yourself a witch. That is a personal judgment on when you feel that you're ready to call yourself that, or if you ever feel that you're ready to call yourself that. Okay, last comment here is Christianity had and maintained some good ideas, and it's okay to defer to them. This is kind of interesting, and I do see where they're coming from a little bit here. I do think we can take certain aspects from Christianity and the other Abrahamic religions that we find to be successful or useful. Obviously, we're not an Abrahamic religion, so we're not going to take that much. But I think we can look at other religions for maybe some guidance and understanding what works successfully, what doesn't work. One of the big things that comes to mind is community. Obviously, Christianity is much better at organizing events, organizing people to come together. Of course, you have Sunday church service. So the concept of having a physical location where members in your community can go to experience a spiritual connection together, I think that's pretty cool. I kind of wish we could take some of that and incorporate it into a pagan context, where we would have pagan temples in every city with a weekly kind of spiritual service that you could attend. I think that could be really beneficial for the community. So I do think there are certain things you can kind of pull from other religions and incorporate it into paganism, as long as it's not completely anachronistic or doesn't make sense. But yeah, we don't need to hate on everything when it comes to Christianity. There's some good stuff there too. So I really hope you enjoyed this little controversial chat. It's been a little nerve-wracking to talk about some of these ideas with you, but I do think it is important to give voice to some of these things that are troubling you all in the community, some of these things that you have been thinking about a lot, and we should be discussing these points. If we do want to have a genuine, honest, welcoming community, then we need to talk through some of this tough stuff from time to time. So thank you all so much, those of you who did comment and share. And of course, please do be kind in the comments of this video down below. Please recognize I am not an expert by any means. I'm just sharing my own 2 cents here, and I'm not always the most eloquent speaker. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye!